Good morning, Frank. I am so excited to see you and welcome. I also would like to thank the Thinkly team. They have been phenomenal in facilitating this for us, and I think you and I have shared conversations over many, many weeks in the past saying that, hey, I'd like to, how about we do this? We get on the phone, we talk about so many things. And I said, hey, how about you come on my community and let's just chat live. And so thank you for doing this. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yeah. One thing I also wanted to share with the audience is this is my first time setting up the community. So just for the sake of the audience, my reason for starting this community today was simply to share stories. And let me elaborate just a little quick on just a little bit on that. There is so much out there about being talked about, especially in this environment, this climate, the economic climate that we are in. There is so much being shared via all social media platforms, via LinkedIn. Everybody has something or the other that they are talking about with regards to customer success. And I wanted to take just a little bit out of our experiences and just bring that to the audience in the form of stories, success stories that we can talk to everybody about, and hopefully quality over quantity is my commitment, and hopefully everybody enjoys them. So once again, Frank, you and I have known each other for 7, 8 years now, and it has
Oh, I
been
think so, yes.
yeah, it has been a phenomenal ride. So thank you again for doing this. Why don't you give everybody, I know we did the promotional videos and some content and all of that via LinkedIn, some other channels. Why don't you just share a little bit of your background with everybody?
Thank you, Rijuta. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah, again, my name is Frank Monastero, and my background actually began early days when you talk about IT, where we used to build computers in these boutique computer stores. And I was one of those people who did that. And then on the weekends, I'd put a tie on and I would be on the sales floor and help people choose the right computer for them, usually home office type environments and applications. And of course, the software that came with that. And then over time, actually, I got into other areas of the IT world. I worked for one of the big networking companies in the 90s, and then gravitated more and more towards software. And that's really, I think, where Rijuta and our paths crossed, because when you deal in software for a large enterprise, we often talk about the customer journey. And it's so important to really have an understanding of what that journey will be and where it's going to take the customer. And that's where sales, where I've always made my career, and customer success come together, where it's really benefiting the end client. And so ultimately, I've spent most of my time in the IT world, over 30 years, and with several different companies. And I've been fortunate to work for companies with 20 people, or the largest of companies with over 300,000 people. And the customer journey, though, is always very critical, no matter what size company you work for. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. You're absolutely right. The customer journey is so important. And oftentimes, in customer success, we use the phrase inside out versus outside in. And oftentimes we end up projecting what is consuming us, which is talking about the product or talking about what is important to the company, and almost expecting that the customer understands what's in our minds. It's never that. If you keep the focus on the customer, you automatically pivot and make changes to your activities and your actions, and then automatically that results in a great experience. So yeah, the outside in is hard to imbibe, but it is so important in terms of the customer journey. Yeah, so looking forward, Frank, to continuing our collaboration as we go forward as well. So you have been a great mentor. I have been in IT now for over 25 years, and honestly, the partnership that I have shared with you and your teams has been phenomenal. So,
well, thank you. And likewise, I mean, the benefit that we have seen for the customer and for the sales team, for your professionalism and your experience has been really measurable.
And as we move the customers through the different versions of the product, for a software company, you've had a whole lot of background. Your background now is in the federal space. Talk to us a little bit about how that is different from the commercial space. I know that is something that you enjoy speaking about and trying to share, that here's the big difference and this is why it's so important. So please talk to us a little bit
Sure.
about that.
I'd be happy to, Rijuta. And it is, and again, I'll sort of anchor this in the fact that, again, it's always about that customer, the end customer, the journey that they have to take to get value to either in a corporate setting, a commercial setting, impact their business, and that's usually measured in ROI, or contrast slightly, not that ROI is not important in government, it is. However, it's generally more important to ensure you're impacting the government organization's mission. And where I like to kind of draw the similarities is that effectively, a core mission in government can be something as critical as, where lives are at stake, homeland security or defense or medical, or it could be more what you might consider back office, administrative in nature. In any effect, that's the most important thing to keep in mind, because whether it's software or hardware or some combination of infrastructure, effectively customer success, sales, any of the consultants have to really understand what it is they're doing or trying to accomplish for that core mission. And the ROI becomes a little secondary. But these organizations can be massive. It's very similar to calling on a Fortune 10, where you have a global infrastructure and you're dealing with thousands and thousands of people who depend on what you're doing. So it's more typical of a large carrier. Think of Verizon and AT&T and NTT, someone like that. And so scale also tests teams, it tests products. And so you always have to be mindful of that as you're walking into a government or federal environment, because these missions are so critical. You really don't want to be taking a chance on something that has not been scaled out before, not been tested to the level it will be tested in these organizations, because it's more about trying to get to the 5 nines than it is about an ROI.
So true. And I've even chatted with so many heads of sales where their teams are able to meet quarterly numbers, but oftentimes, even at the leadership level, not everybody understands the number of players that are involved in acquiring a federal deal, especially with the partners and the numerous entities that go in between, and then the size of the deal. For a software company may be, and we've seen this before, where the actual contract size from where it started out has almost doubled. So it's that much more important. The customer journey or the outcome or the mission, as you call it, understanding that is so much more important, and the clarity of who owns what is so much more important, because it's not easy to pivot. I think we have seen examples also, where, you and I laughed about this after the fact, but at the time that it was happening, we've definitely felt the pain of chickens coming home to roost, where we've made certain commitments and we haven't delivered fast enough, and then the impressions just compound as you go across the numerous layers, with the different parties at play. So for a software company, then, what specific things do you think are very key to bear in mind? Definitely the customer journey and the customer impact. In terms of product, what is it that comes to mind that is important to keep track of?
Well, it's sort of in parallel to, not wanting to be the team that has to test out, can we really go to this level of scale? In that same vein, there is almost always a balance between the product side of the house as well, I'll say, wanting to push out their latest version of software. And the, I'll say, known and unknown elements of doing that for those that are on the front line. So I'll give you an example. It's, when you've done something, many times, 100 times over with a certain version of software, you just know exactly how to do that. And there's always this point at which product wants to push out the new version, and they're simply unknowns. And right. I mean, we've seen that. You're in front of the customer, and something doesn't quite work as it did in the last .x release. And so those kind of things create points at which you have to fall back on process. You have to fall back on experience of the team. You have to over communicate with the customer, and over communicate internally as well, because ultimately you're responsible for delivering that value, and you're responsible for keeping the trust of the customer. And so that's one thing that I've seen that is often, a big challenge, is product wants to go forward. You're not 100% sure that that's been tested yet. And yet, sometimes the customer is actually the catalyst. They want that latest capability. And so I've been in situations, as of you, I know we've been there together, where it's really the customer pushing for it. And you have to tell them, hey, I need you to know, at this scale or with this version, this has not been done yet. So we'll be learning together. And that's usually the best practice. As long as everybody's aware, then everybody's adults, and we move forward.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The customer drives not just the assimilation of the new version, but also the roadmap. In many instances, the reason certain features make their way into the product are also because your strategic customers per se need that as a business functionality, as a business use case. And as long as that's a symbiotic roadmap for both the product, the software product, as well as the customer, it oftentimes makes its way into a beta version. And we've also seen, where something that was being tried or tested, beta version, and then that gets packaged as a as a viable product line and gets shipped out. And then, being upfront with the customer that we are in this together, and the scale of it needs to be worked on. And you find a good partner in a customer that is willing to walk that line with you. I will say that those are probably the best learning stories. So many come to mind. So can then, and I think we are saying that it can happen, but we see so many times where customer success and account management, that brings us to the topic of today's conversation. We've been talking about this, but that push and the pull. Who owns the customer? Who owns it when things are right? Everybody wants to be the owner. When things are not
Right.
right is when that push and pull and you go share the bad news. Who owns the who owns communication with the customer? What constitutes a great customer success account management relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, what I think the best practice is for customer success to go with wherever the account owner is on sales, on the sales side. If we're talking about something that's really, again, I'll use the term mission critical, right? We know we've negatively impacted the mission, or we have that chance.
Yeah.
I'm a believer. It's really important to be, if you will, in the trenches with the customer, in person if possible, together, so we both can hear what he or she is saying, because it's really, again, about communicating. This is where we are. You can't mask it. They've already seen it. If we've had the impact already, or if we are anticipating it, then the best practice is really to over communicate, and then try with the customer to come up with some way to mitigate that. And it's really best for customer success with sales to be there together, because that, again, builds communication, it builds trust. Nobody's hiding, and we all then can see, I'll say, the intensity in that customer's eyes, in their demeanor. And I think that fuels us as well. We all want to deliver quality. It's innate in our industry. And I've never found that, waiting to tell someone something when they can maybe adjust, maybe they can run a different system, or maybe they have a backup way to do things. It's better to tell them in advance. And that way, it also, again, I'll say, builds trust versus waiting.
Yeah, bad news doesn't get better with time, that's for sure. You can resolve it, but the delivery of that doesn't get better, and you get crucified if you are in a customer-facing role. And I don't necessarily think that that a customer that is upset, or that is getting very vocal because of something that they are expecting, is necessarily a bad thing. I often think that shows their commitment, and it is a good thing. Every software company, product, service company as well, should be so thankful that their customers are invested, and it's like any other relationship. You want things to be happy all the time, and most often 100% happiness is never going to be a reality. So figuring out a way to deliver that conversation. I used to call it, I still do, a three-legged stool. It's that triad of customer success, account management, and also the technical team, the sales SE, who is the engineer that is walking toe-to-toe with the account team, trying to convert. So converting the deal is critical for the survival of the software company, of course, but making sure that the information is communicated to the customer. I think many times we've gone from a salesperson that has that piggyback. You have that sharing of ownership, like, hey, I'll be the bad cop now and you be the good cop, and then 2 minutes later you can be the good cop and I'll be the bad cop. So I think that works well with a CS and account manager as well. In your experience specifically, what would you say has been a great customer success management experience for you, and how has it been generally over the years? It's not a new philosophy. but it is still
Right.
in many ways taking fruition, taking root, So what's your
You know,
experience?
I have a belief that, again, similar to the contrast or the parallels we mentioned in, the Fortune 10 versus government. I think for all of, the industry, it is always helpful to have someone on the team who really is deeply ensconced in what the customer's requirement is. Okay.
Yeah,
And sometimes that means you have hired someone from the customer, or from within that industry. And again, that just helps from the standpoint of there may be other solutions, meaning they may have a process that you need to marry up with your own customer journey process. And those kind of things I've found to be invaluable when you have someone who has the experience. And in my life, it's usually been somebody who was perhaps military and now
yeah,
they work in the IT industry, and they really know the customer. They know the mission. They might have a background again in an area that the company just doesn't have, and those things add quite a lot of value. I've seen that for banking as well when I've done some work in the banking industry, and we had someone from that particular bank, um, and it works the same. That experience, especially when you face a challenge,
yeah.
there's really nothing that replaces experience.
So true. There's nothing that replaces experience. Technical CSMs or non-technical CSMs? Which would you pick?
Well, that's a good question. Um, I like to uh, put that more. I'll broaden the frame a little bit, where it would depend on the team, the overall team. Again, recognizing my answer earlier that it's always best to be a unified front and to have a team that's willing to go to the customer, be in the trenches with them when things are going good or bad. Um, and so, in that light, in that frame, I would say you want a CSM who is complementary to the overall team. If you have a very technical sales team with a
Yeah,
very strong SE, maybe they've got consulting background from the SE, then
yeah,
you can do very well with
yeah,
a non-technical CSM. On the other hand, the earlier example of having somebody who maybe came from the customer, I've often found that being a technical person who
yeah,
already is part of that inner circle of the technical mind trust that is in the customer, uh, that's invaluable. Probably that is at the highest value I've seen, only
yeah,
because I'm not technical. So that's just my
yeah.
perspective. Um, but I would generally lean towards making sure the team has all the components to it, that are complementary, and
Yeah.
no matter what, that requires to have that customer mindset at the foundation.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is it doesn't matter who it doesn't matter which department, as long as the role is satisfied and you need somebody that can provide that technical guidance and assistance, and then somebody that manages the relationship as well. So
Right.
yeah, so putting department names or titles to the roles is meaningless because the customer doesn't care. You are one entity in the eyes of the customer. Somebody solve it for me is oftentimes the line I've heard. So let's
That's
take
right.
a couple comments and questions from the audience here. Thank you so much again, everybody, for joining. This truly, truly is exciting for us. And you might recognize a name here, Frank John Gonzalez, who we both worked with. He's on the chat as well. A colleague of mine, Katrin. People have got up at different, so this is truly a global session. We are addressing an audience in India, on the East Coast, on the Pacific West Coast as well. So thank you again, everybody, for joining. Please share your comments and questions on the chat. I am moderating and monitoring. So Katrin says that she can totally relate to what you're saying, Frank. And may I ask your best practice when everything has been communicated, tested, etc., but we still have to fall back due to issues? What is the best practice? What is your guidance or recommendation there?
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting, right? That's almost the Apollo 13 scenario, right? And you have to, figure out a way forward. And that, I think, Katrine, that probably goes right to that last segment where we talked about, Rijuta asked, well, is it technical versus non-technical CSM? And I think if the makeup of the team is proper, you have greater chances of success and probably more rapid success. In other words, it really becomes an Apollo 13 situation where it's like, okay, well, the things we've done and our process hasn't worked, our checklist hasn't worked. I think when you have everybody who has, the proper training, the proper experience, and the proper character, quite honestly, that's what drives you to find the way forward. So I think that's the only way I can answer that. And I think it is that real duty to the customer, which is why I always talk about being with them in the trenches to understand their mission, understand their core business, if it's a commercial business. And as Rijuta said, hey, if they're not upset, you're probably not important. So if they are upset, then what you need to do is you need to let that energize you, and you need to draw on that team, and probably also approach the customer themselves and say, hey, we're putting this team together with this objective. We're open to having you on that team. We're going to share everything with you. So you want those to be trusted people and everybody looking for a way forward. Hopefully that's a good answer for you.
That's a true answer. I think that absolutely speaks to what typically happens out there as well. Here's another question, and we may have to seek a little bit more clarification on this, but how do companies determine which paradigm, like the push or pull, and I'm guessing this is whether we are, who is pushing towards delivering the conversation to the customer, or when are you pulling back from delivering the news to the customer? How do companies determine what is best suited for their specific industry, market, and customer base? When do we decide that we need to push something out to the customer, or when do we decide that, hey, we're going to hold something back? What defines that? I mean, for us, I would think that there are oftentimes, I have not seen software companies pull back the release of a product unless there is a pretty heavy, compelling reason to pull back a release. What would you say, Frank?
Yeah, if we're talking about that, I would agree. I mean, there are things that come to mind, that are absolutes, right? You've discovered, and we've seen some of the big companies, I won't name them here, but everybody knows them because we use their software regularly, where there's a security, problem. And so at that point, that's an absolute. You have to make that call. And that's usually done, at the most senior level of the company, head of product or somebody even above them. I think otherwise, if it's not something at that level, generally you're going to find it's going to be the head of consulting who makes that call.
Yeah.
And then they go to the CSM and sales team, usually in parallel.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I have an opinion on which one is better to carry that message forward. As long as it's unified, I would support it.
Yeah, you read my that was going to be my side subtext question there. So you read my mind, actually. Yes, you're absolutely right. There isn't a right or wrong person to deliver the news. It is a unified response that comes from the organization there. We have one more question. This is from Vivek Saxena, and Vivek actually heads up Thinkly, by the way, Frank. So thank you, Vivek, for joining. I remember he comes from Microsoft, and during his Microsoft days, we used to have .NET evangelists. But the moment it became mainstream, the team was absorbed into sales and pre-sales. And you think that this is, do you think that this is an appropriate strategy to absorb a customer success team and bring them into the mix at this point?
Wow, that's a good question. I probably should make sure I understand it. So when the .NET became mainstream, Microsoft simply disbanded the separate organization and merged them into sales.
I think that's
right?
What he's alluding to, that they were focused so much on the sales and the pre-sales side, and the success of the customer became secondary because people that would have been looking at or addressing the customer's needs were then absorbed into the sales function. Is this a good time to put together a specific customer success organization?
Yeah, I think that's maybe not the best way to do it, right? I think what's incumbent on sales is, to me, ensuring that the use case is in fact a proper fit. And so I don't know this particular scenario for Microsoft, but it occurs to me that absorbing that organization for sales, you probably have people who are wired a little differently, where the sales organization is, as you mentioned, Rijuta, measured on these quarterly numbers. And to me, customer success, we all have to be aware of those things. We're part of these companies that are driven by that. But I think the people are wired a little differently. I think what drives them is service in that customer success world. And that's their primary driver, to be, in fact, delivering good service. And I would say that's always good to be mindful of that in sales, but it's usually a secondary driver, not the primary driver. So that probably didn't work from a cultural perspective. But I don't know this particular scenario, but that's I guess the best way I can answer that.
Yeah, the cultural, and we've heard this saying so many times in the past, and it keeps coming up over and over again. The culture always stumps strategy, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast is the saying. But yeah, you're absolutely right. From a cultural perspective, I can't think of how that would have played out. One more question, one quick question. I know we are running past time, so thank you for staying on. But a quick question I would like to take here from Dinesh. Actually, two questions. When and why should a company start thinking about changing their existing CSM strategy or practice? And then, is the experience transferable to different industries, such as healthcare? So the first one is, when should they think about changing the existing strategy? And then, is it transferable or applicable to different industries? I have an opinion, but I will let you answer that first.
Okay, if you like. So, I mean, it's interesting because this is a great question for Rijuta and I. We were advocating for a change, and this goes back probably 5 years, and a company that we both know is making that change now, where customer success is, I'll say, their measurements are being moved out to be longer term. In other words, in the software world, we talk about something called churn. And, people vote with their feet and they vote with their dollars or whatever currency. And effectively, churn can show that. And so I think in this particular use case, the CSM organization is becoming more and more responsible for the delivery, that customer journey, and ensuring they're getting to success, versus having different groups where you have sort of a service organization and a CSM organization. So that journey is so important. And I think having that goal moved out a little further makes people think longer term. Is this customer truly going to decide to stay with us? And I think when you look at that and you think out years, you're then also measuring things against what the lifetime value of that relationship is. And that's not just measured in dollars, because a great relationship is a complete feedback loop, and both organizations realize it becomes a partnership and they both get stronger. So that's a whole separate podcast. We can do a whole session on that one by itself, but that's my answer.
I would absolutely agree that is a whole separate podcast, and we can regroup on that at a different time. But it is not measured in dollars. A relationship extends far beyond just the monetary results that you reap from them. And it also extends, and to Dinesh's specific question, if you set up the practice or the operations or the motions correctly, it is absolutely portable across industries. It should be. It has to be transferable from one specific industry to another. So very quickly, looking ahead, what will be key in 2024 for customer success and account management to focus on?
Well, again, I'm mindful of security always. And I think we're seeing with the geopolitical environment, everybody's having to check to make sure they're not the weak link in the chain, right? And I think we've had, examples across large and small, providers, OEMs, if you will. And so I think they're all on alert. And I think it has to be incumbent on everybody to be looking at that as a primary foundation within the process, to be checking that first, so that you're not propagating something that could be avoided. And then the other, of course, everybody's talking about, which is how can our industry leverage these large language models and AI and automation to really improve these outcomes. I'm a big believer that we're going to see a lot of advancement in that area, and that our industry is well suited to make advancements and innovations in the way these things will then be applied in other industries, whether they be medical, legal, or whatnot. So I think it's really up to us to take a leadership role. So those are probably the two things I would mention.
Thank you so much, Frank. On that note, I would like to thank you for taking the time today. AI, LLMs, and a whole different podcast. I will be bugging you to talk about those things in the future. So look forward to sharing some more with our valued audience coming up over the next several weeks, months, and maybe even years. So thank you again, Frank. I regard you as a mentor and a colleague, and truly, truly appreciate your time this morning.
Well, thank you, Rijuta. Thank you for having me, and likewise, the feelings are mutual.
Yeah. All right. Thank you to our audience for joining. Whatever time it is in your time zone, I know some folks have been celebrating the new year in India, and then there is Eid today. So there, across the globe, people are in a celebratory mood. So wishing everybody good health, happiness, and success coming up in 2024.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.